two announcements I wanted to make. One is our bee school is scheduled and active, and people are signing up for it. So if you're interested in going over some interesting bee material, it's got the same agenda every year, or the same syllabus every year, I should say. But there's different presenters, and we usually get a mixture of information. So it covers all the basics that we cover in every bee school, but then we add little supplements to it each year. So you get a good grounded instruction. And of course, it's geared toward beginners beekeepers, so it goes over all the basics. And Paula's going to do the last week of it this year, where she's going to go over pests, and she'll go a little bit over the regulations, right, Paula?
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and she's going to go over the some pests we should look out. And she's been out to a number of, I guess not a number of, but a few colonies already this year, and she's got some good reviews. So that's really good. Really proud to have you on board there, Paula. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are in a really odd November, and that's okay. And this November is odd in that we're still seeing bees flying in today, not today, but yesterday. So yesterday, and I'm sure they'll fly tomorrow. And I saw pollen coming back. Now, I don't know exactly where that pollen is coming from, and if it's pollen at all, but it could be from white wood aster or something like that. That's in some kind of a protected area that's still growing. But I really don't know where that's coming. It was a pure white pollen, so aster has a little bit of color to it. So I'm not really sure where this came from, if it's pollen at all, if it's birdseed dust or whatever it is, or something that they're picking up that's not pollen at all. But anyway, so the bees are still out foraging, so hopefully you have prepared them well. So does anybody see anything that's blooming? Yes, Paula.
I have some chrysanthemums, not the fancy kind that are like quadruple blooms, but the very basic ones that look like little light pink daisies. And they bloom right now. They're kind of finishing up, and the bees love those. And I did witch hazel blooming already up in Litchfield County, but it was already in bloom. So I was surprised to hear you say that it's coming up, because I've already seen it in bloom.
Well, yes. So yeah, there's different bloom schedules for them. The phenology of how plants bloom, even in this small state of Connecticut, is really interesting, because there's microclimates where things are happening and I wouldn't expect them to be blooming at all, and then they are. Like there might even be some people in a microclimate somewhere where we still have a little bit of goldenrod out. Knotweed for sure is gone, but there might be some goldenrod in different places that's still out. I'm not really sure, but we're talking about. Think about what we're doing. We're talking about forage plants in November 14th. Yeah, I mean that's pretty unusual, since there was never been in my experience with beekeeping, there's never been a November like this. So I'm really not sure what this is doing to stores. I know that if you have a top feeder on your colonies and you've been feeding right along, there's a chance that you will get bees up into that feeder, especially if you have an insulated cover. You'll get bees up into that feeder all during the next week, because the highs will be in the 50s. And I think over the weekend here coming up, highs will be in the 60s, and bees will just have no need for cluster, and they can go up and take that syrup down. Hopefully you're feeding 2-to-1 if you're still doing that. If you're still provisioning feed on your colonies and they're still taking it, let them do it. And because I get all kinds of questions this time of year with when should we start winterization? Anytime you want is the answer to that question. There's really no reason to think that you have to feed and then winterize or do something like that. If you've winterized, by winterizing, if you mean putting insulation around your colony, you can do that anytime you want. So it's not dangerous to put insulation on too early. It's not dangerous to leave insulation in all year long. Insulation is benign. So what I'm trying to say is bees and trees live in insulation all year round. You can buy polystyrene boxes that are insulated, and you can leave them on, or you can leave your bees in them all year long. Insulation does not harm bees. It gives them an advantage for thermoregulation. That's all it does. So, so by winterizing, I get it. When should I put my sleeves on? When should I put my covers on? Anytime you want. And in my case, I leave insulated top covers on all year long. So I never take my insulation off the top of the colony. I will take the sleeve off. And the reason I take the sleeve off is because it interferes with inspections and moving boxes around. And there's really no advantage of it there, because 75% of the heat is lost from the top of the colony. And that's really the heat you want to try to conserve. All right, so that's sort of the answer to when should I winterize my colonies. And when should you stop feeding is another question that we usually get this time of year. And the answer to that is when the bees won't take down any more syrup. And hopefully you're feeding 2 to 1 at this point. So and they're going to take that and put it in cells or eat it. Who knows what they're going to do with it? My bees have been flying for the last week, so they're using a little bit of energy to do that. The disadvantage of having warm weather like this is that flight activity requires, a certain amount of energy at the muscular level for bees, and that energy isn't normally provisioned for in this time of year. So it will be an interesting spring for us. Hi, this is my first meeting. Hey, welcome, Lauren. Glad you're here. Hi, all. I'm planning to apply an oxalic acid dribble early tomorrow or Saturday. All right, that's great. You can do that. You can actually do a dribble anytime you want. Just make certain that you understand that an oxalic acid dribble is not something you can continue to do. Right? It's a one-time application, and that's where you stop with that. It's got a maximum amount of it has the maximum amount of oxalic acid that you can use in your colony, and dribbles are not recommended to be done in a serial fashion, because this time of year people are thinking their colonies are broodless. That might not be the case this November, and that they're also, instead of another application of oxalic acid that beekeepers are using this time of year is a sublimation of it or a vaporization of it in the colony. And some folks will do that in a series of planned, timed applications. And the theory, with no actual proven science behind it, is that it will catch all the emerging varroa and kill them if you do it like every 5 days or so, or every 7 days. But we don't really have any data that supports using oxalic acid cyclically in 5-day intervals, that it has any better effect on your colony than having it just doing it one time, right? So, what we actually recommend here at CBA, and what I know, real professional beekeepers all over that are applying oxalic acid in a legal fashion. These are the commercial beekeepers that are not doing anything illegal. What they do is they make certain that they apply their oxalic acid when the colonies are broodless. So that requires the oxalic acid vapor and the oxalic acid dribble when the colonies are broodless, right? Because oxalic acid has no effect on varroa that are capped under cells. Anyone insulate with styrofoam before? Many people have. Lauren, this is your first meeting? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, styrofoam, well, styrofoam probably is not the best choice. Styrofoam is what you get for little coffee cups. And that's like a product that it's got good insulation properties, but it's extremely sensitive to any kind of mechanical movement. It'll just keep flitting away. So we use extended polystyrene. So we use EPS foams on the colonies instead of styrofoam. Styrofoam is not the right thing to use, in my opinion. Just looking for some information. Instructions called for mixing oxalic acid with 1:1 sugar, water syrup, and also saw some information regarding using glycerin instead of sugar water. Well, you might have saw that information, but of course, you can't go ahead and mix glycerin with anything at this point on your own and put it in your colony. That would be against the law at this point. We have products that are available that already have done that for you, time release products. One is Varroxsan. And so that's your go-to at this point, your legal go-to at this point, where you'll have a glycerin and oxalic acid combination, which is also a time release combination. So that's the answer to that question. And now what? Mixing oxalic acid with 1:1 sugar water. The only time you ever do that is when you are reading the label on that, John, and that label tells you that you can do that on a package. And that procedure is very specific. And what you do in that case is you spray your package bees with plain sugar water, get them to fill up their honey stomachs with that. And then you can mix up a batch of 1:1 sugar and oxalic acid and spray it on them according to the directions on the label. Tells you exactly what the mixture is, the weight of the mixture and the syrup, and then you can spray them on your packages that way, right? So that's how you can do it. Whether or not you would spray oxalic acid, I don't know if spraying oxalic acid on frames of bees, like in other words, pulling them up and spraying 1:1 sugar water with oxalic acid, I'm not sure if that's a violation of the label's requirements or not. What do you think, Paula?
I don't think that the label calls, they only call for spraying on packages.
Packages, yeah. So I think technically it would be illegal, but that was what we would do there. All right. What size opening would you suggest for the winter entrance reducer? The size of the opening, I leave a 3-inch opening. This is from Frank, and he wants to know what size he should leave, what size opening should he leave in the wintertime. And I use a 3-inch entrance. And the size entrance, in other words, you don't have to reduce it down to the smallest size, right? You're not protecting your bees by reducing their entrance. The air or the environment down below the cluster, just a few inches away of the cluster, is generally the same temperature as ambient air. The real heat begins on the edge of the mantle when bees are in cluster. Those bees are generating heat that will then find its way through the cluster and keep them from going into a chill coma and dying. So your entrance reducing size doesn't matter. But what I think would matter is leaving the bottom open all year. So if you have a screen bottom, then you should slide something in there. It doesn't have to be insulation, but it can be a thin piece of Luan or something that would keep updrafts from entering into your colony. And you'll find that that gets wet in the wintertime. And the other way you can do that is if you don't want to block off your screen bottom, you can leave it open as long as you insulate down to the ground. And then you can let the moisture go through and out of the colony down to the ground, but you have to still provide a draft break for the bottom, in my opinion. That's the best way to do it. So entrance size, not a big problem. Bottom open, more of an issue. All right, Gene, I've seen some very small amounts of pollen on the mite drop board. Saw some green pollen today in Stanford. Green pollen. All right, okay. I don't know what green pollen is, Gene. Because there's nothing in bloom. I have double blooming iris in my garden, one of my gardens, and believe it or not, they have put out beautiful blooms, and they are still blooming even after the frost today. So some plant somewhere has green pollen, but I wouldn't know what that is. Light green pollen in the grayish green.
It was more like an olive green.
Olive green, yeah, okay. Well, olive green would be, if I saw that in the spring, I'd say it would be maple. But there's nothing, no maple blooming now, is there? Anything?
Who knows?
That's right. Who knows? Nobody knows. All right. So, yeah. So anyway, but they were bringing it in.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah.
But
And,
still
and same
interesting.
thing.
Still
Same thing
going
with-
on, you know.
Yeah. The same thing with the white pollen I saw. They were bringing white pollen in. Now, who knows where that ever came from? Yeah, Peter, I've used that for a number of years. That's called, so Peter Hayes is answering this insulation foam question by saying he goes to Home Depot that has a foil on one side. So a foil backed insulation is used in most cases to reflect infrared radiation back from a surface into a space. And you can also do that with your bees. It will reflect some IR back. So that's what Peter is saying he's doing. And that's kind of cool. I like that idea. So, so I think we're clear of the insulation section. And unless anybody has any more questions about material that they can use for insulation or can't use for insulation. You can use just about anything, but I suggest you use a product that gives you a big high R value so you don't have to fool around putting lots of inches of foam on top of them. You know, unless you live in the Yukon like Etienne Tardif does, and he puts in about 4 inches of high density foam on top of his colonies every winter just to get them, you know, past this little -40-degree spell that he has. Here where we live, we don't need that kind of, all we really need insulation that'll keep the top of the box over the bees above the dew point. So that's your goal. Your goal is to keep area over the cluster clear of liquid moisture. And the rest of the moisture that accumulates in the colony is good for bees, actually. There's a number of good reasons for it to be in there. One is that it releases latent heat as it forms, so the bees have a little bit of a heat recovery, natural heat recovery. And the other thing, it serves as a reservoir for liquid water that bees can use during the year to thin honey when they break cluster, and lots of other things that they can use it for. So Jared, talk about small hive beetles, please. I'd rather not. I hate them. This year, this year was a terrible year for me personally, but who cares about that? But I did hear that other people suffered the same fate that I did. Now, I think they came up with packages this year, and we ended up with a wonderful, perfect environment for them to reproduce. You're saying here, Jared is saying, please, I've never used beetle blasters before this year, and now I have 4 installed per colony, filling 1 whole seam on the top box and 1 whole seam on the bottom box. I located it close to the edge of the frame, but couldn't get it all the way to the edge without the box sitting on the beetle blaster. Does that sound okay? Well, if you're going to use beetle blasters, that's probably the best you can do with them. But I don't think they're the best. So what a beetle blaster is, for those who don't know, is a plastic little tray that goes between the seams of bees. It has 2 overlapping edges that lay on top of frames. And that keeps the little seam filled with oil. It's just one piece, so it can hold oil. And it has little spaces on the top where beetles can hide in. And that's what it sort of looks like. Maybe somebody can get a picture on the internet and share their screen, and we can show you what a beetle blaster looks like. Beetle blasters are difficult to use. First of all, they never sit level unless you have perfect equipment, which I don't have. Maybe you do. If you have all new boxes and all new frames, and every frame is from the same manufacturer, and the top bar is exactly identical in every frame, from every frame, or at least the end frames where you're going to put your beetle blaster, it will sit at different heights, minutely different. But what it does is it makes it impossible for you to actually get it to lay down completely flat on your top bar. And that gives beetles a wonderful place to hide and lay eggs and do whatever they're going to do, you know. So and then it's difficult to pull that thing out because you got to get a hive tool under one edge and lift it, and then get the hive tool on the other edge and lift it, and you know, invariably you're going to spill oil inside the colony. So they're really difficult to use. There's another variety of oil container that has two little light plastic arms that stick out. And that one is much simpler to use. You give it a little bit of space, push it down between the seams of the bees, and it will go right to the end of the box. So that's the advantage of that particular one. I forgot what that one's called, but you can find them in Better Bee and other catalogs sell that one. I forgot. There's different trade names. I got mine off the internet. I bought them from
Nam
Amazon.
Lake has them called Beetle Jail.
Beetle Jail. Okay. All right. There you go. Yeah. Amazon. That's right. That's Beetle Jail on Amazon. So that's the one you can look for. I think that's a much better alternative. That one doesn't care about your odd frames. You know, that one will lay below the surface of your frames and not interfere. Beetle Blaster always stays a little bit proud of the top bar, but the Beetle Jail doesn't. It stays below, just below 1/16 of an inch or so below the top bar. And that gives the bees a really good chance of corralling the small hive beetle into that little beetle jail. And then they can't get back out. Of course, they can't get out of a beetle blaster either. But they're doomed because they can't hide underneath the beetle blaster ledges. Now, what I did with the beetle blasters when I first got them is, and I started to use them, I noticed that real problem. So before I did anything with the colony, I was going to inspect, I would run my hive tool over the top of that beetle blaster really hard so that I squashed any beetles that were underneath that beetle blaster. No luck, by the way. With anything else except the oil traps in my experience this year. I actually tried for a number of years using the Howls, the scentless Swiffers. I bought a box of 1,000 of them from one of the supply houses. I ended up giving them all away. I found that they were tangled with as many bees as there were small hive beetles in them. So I found them to be difficult to use. And there's also a danger that you can tangle your queen up in one of them. So I stopped using those and had great luck with the oil traps, but they're hard to use. And, I demonstrated at the bee yard exactly how to fill them with a little syringe. I managed to keep them out of the colony, but I didn't keep them from reproducing, because what they did was they went into a tray that I kept underneath my screen bottoms. I have a tray that slides in, and in there I put diagnostic material like sticky boards and things like that I want to use. Well, those areas became a breeding patch for small hive beetles. So they were chased down into there, and then they laid their eggs in the pollen balls that were down there that fell out of the colony and never got to a cell. And any source of pollen anywhere, that pollen that was laying on the entrance inside the colony, the beetles raised larvae off that. So even though I would go into a colony that I'd find larvae coming out of and find no evidence of them sliming comb, they were still able to breed larvae on pollen scraps that they found either on as I say, my slide-in tray, my drop board, underneath the drop board. I didn't even look, at first when they were really going strong. When I would lift up my drop board and look under it, there were 100 larvae swimming around down there in the pollen that was lost naturally out of a colony when pollen foragers come back and lose their pellet of pollen before they can get it into a cell, or lose it while they're packing in cell. So really strange year for that. So that's small hive beetles. I left some oil traps in. I'm going to leave them in there till spring, and we'll see what happens. Every beetle that goes into an oil trap dies. No beetle ever can reproduce inside of an oil trap unless there's something in there for them to eat. Now, the other thing that was really interested is there's different phenotypes or actual physical sizes of small hive beetles. I don't know if they're subspecies or what, but there's distinctly different sizes, and I illustrated that at the bee yard. We have a larger small hive beetle and then a littler small hive beetle. Now, I don't know if the little one that is from an insufficient larval stage underneath the ground or what. It looks just like a regular, bigger small hive beetle, and it does just as much damage inside the colony, but there are two different sizes. This is a question from Jean. I saw cap worker brood and eggs last week in one colony, not so broodless yet. Yeah. I mean, the big discussion going around in the bee world at this point is Tropolalaps, the next mite that we might see invade our bee space here in North America. And I think it's inevitable that it will be here. I'm just hoping it doesn't come in my time as a beekeeper. But we have had a lot of misinformation about that particular mite right along. And one of the misinformation pieces is that it's, as far as our current understanding is, that it's totally dependent on the brood cycle of the colony, meaning there has to be young open larva for it to find its way into a cell, then do its magic underneath the cap cell, where it does terrible damage to larvae. Not like, well, Varroa is no walk in the park, and it stunts the growth of worker bees. It gives us, it vectors the foreign wing virus and a bunch of other viruses. Tropolalaps, the next mite that might come on the scene, does exactly the same thing, but it does it worse because it feeds in different parts of the growing pupa and deforms cells specifically in those areas. So you'll get bees that come out, and I saw these. You get bees that come out of a colony that's infested with Tropolalaps, and they have an antenna missing, or legs that didn't develop on one side, or wings that don't exist on one side. So they damage stem cells with the way that they feed. It's just tremendously heartbreaking. But we always thought, hey, we don't have to worry about this because here we are in the Northeast. We have a brood cycle where bees go broodless, and then that'll be it. Because since they can't live more than a week without brood, our colonies will get clear of Tropolalaps very early. Not the case. I mean, Al Avatable, a friend of mine, and some of you may know him, goes way back. Turned 94 this year, by the way. Him and I worked bees together for a very, very long time. And back in the 70s, Al did a study on bees in Connecticut. 3 years in a row, he used a horrible agent to kill bees at different times of the winter. He used 30 colonies for 3 seasons, and he counted the capped brood. And he noticed that there was capped brood starting in sometime in November, open brood and some larvae starting in November, and continue with some strength over December. And then from December on, all the time there was some kind of brood in that colony. So the mythology that we're going to end up with broodless periods that will help us with Tropolalaps, I think, is a misinformation. It's bee lore. There will be colonies. I want to temper that discussion with letting you know there will be colonies that will go broodless during that period, but not them all, not all of them. And if you have 6 or 7 or 8 colonies in your yard, and you have like something like today, this year, you're going to have brood. And Jean's saying it. She has eggs last week. So that's brood. And I think that will continue all through the winter in fits and starts, but it would be plenty to keep Tropolalaps alive over the winter time, because it's surviving right now in places in China where they go into deep freezes for weeks at a time. So how do you explain that? Let's talk a little bit about Varroxsan, because I think it's surprising some people, and I want to get clear about what it does when you put a strip inside of a colony. I got what I would think a very satisfied drop with Varroxsan over its treatment period when I was allowed to keep it in the colony, for the amount of days that I was allowed to keep it in the colony. If you drop it, when you drape Varroxsan over a frame per the instructions, what you will notice is if you put it over a honey frame, which you're not supposed to do. All right, so you're supposed to put your Varroxsan oxalic strip. And for those that don't know what we're talking about here, let me back up. Varroxsan is a new product that we are currently able to order from Better Bee, and we use as a time release oxalic acid strip, and it's oxalic acid and glycerin in a tested and verified concentration ratio. And then you can put that in your colonies and leave it in there for a number of days. I think 42 to 50 something days. So you just read it. It's right on the package. It's really easy to figure that out. Problem is that it comes with a lot of strips in one package, and that's what Jack's getting at. But anyway, I want to be clear. You don't put it over honey frames, right? If you put this Varrox strip over a honey frame, what you'll find out is when you come back in 10 days, there are no cells under that strip. So what they do is they will vacate the cells of any honey that's in it, and they will eat the wax down to the midrib, right? And then so folks who have never used these strips before of any kind are interpreting that as Varroxsan is damaging their strips. First of all, if you put it in over honey, you've put it in the wrong place. If you put it over, you should only put Varroxsan per the instructions over brood frame, not near brood frames, over brood frames. Now, if you put Varroxsan strip over a brood frame that has capped brood, they will let that brood emerge naturally, and there's less diminishing of that comb. You know, it's old wax, and bees will only use old wax occasionally to build emergency cells for queens if there's no new wax in the colony. So they leave that stuff in the brood nest pretty much alone. All right. So, and so what we'll do next year, Jack, is the same thing. I'll buy them from the club, and I'll let folks know when the Varroxsan will be available, and you can come up and get some strips from us. Or if you want to go in with somebody in the club and buy your own, you're welcome to do that, of course.
Is it something I can put on now, Bill?
Yes, you can put it on now. Any other questions about Varroxsan? It's expensive, and the folks at Better Bee are trying to convince the manufacturer to put it into smaller size packages because it comes in such a large size package. Peter brings up a good point. Peter Hayes is saying, we're going back now to the question about entrance reducers, and Peter is saying best to leave, I think you're saying, I can't read the thing, best to leave the flip open so it's facing up. Okay, so what Peter is going old school on us here, and it's a good practice. If you got especially if you have a really strong hive going into wintertime, you're going to get a lot of bees that drop off. And part of Al's 1974 study that he conducted here in Connecticut, he went over and counted every single bee that was in the colony also. And from September to the end of November, there was about 10,000 bees that died in the colony, naturally aged out, and they weren't supposed to winter. Those were bees that were at the end of their life, but they were hanging on in the colony, and then they finally died. So 10,000 bees is a lot of bees. And if you have a colony, a really robust colony, real strong, going into the winter, you're going to have a lot of dead bees that accumulate on the bottom board. And if there's normally a strong colony, when we get warm days, the bees will come out, and undertaker bees will remove those dead bees, and you'll find them in the snow outside the colony. And then by the way, that's an indicator that the colony is still alive. But what we do is, if you're not going to go around and regularly put a little coat hanger or something in the front entrance to pull all your dead bees out and help those undertaker bees, because really the only thing you ever have to do is clear a single path from the back of the bottom board all the way out to the front entrance, and you'll never have any problem with dead bees clogging that entrance up, and then that'll kill the whole colony if they can't get out at all, ever, and you leave it that way until March. So you can't do that. You got to get in there and do a little maintenance. But Peter's suggesting that you flip your entrance reducer over, and what that does, and we've done this for many years, is this notch is now on the top, And it would take a whole lot of dead bees for them to block the entrance. As a matter of fact, if the entrance gets blocked when their entry introducer is flipped around, the colony's likely dead. All right, because every bee died in it. So that's another way if you don't want to get in there with your little tool to pull dead bees out during the winter. But I suggest you go and clean them out because it's fun to do in the middle of the winter. And anyway, you'll find bees in the snow that are still alive. You can revive them with your breath and put them back in the colony. It's a really fun thing to do. All right. And then, by the way, that also argues for leaving a 3-inch space open in your entry introducer all year round, because then you can get in there and clean it out easier. Frank, that called the hive hugger. Yeah, Frank, I know what you're talking about. You can't buy that at Home Depot, can you?
No,
You
you
said-
can't buy that at Home Depot. I
Oh,
bought
I thought you said you could
lighting.
buy that at Home Depot.
No, I got that online. I forget. I think it was
Yeah.
Erica. One of these Zooms I was on, they showed it. So I ordered it. And I'm just trying it this year. It's
Yeah,
kind of neat.
there's no, yeah, so the hive hugger goes around the outside, right?
Yes, yes.
All right, so that's really unimportant insulation. It's good to put it on there. It squeezes down the insulation on the corners, so you get 0 there. So you're going to get a bunch of heat loss on the corners of the hive hugger. And it doesn't have a real high R value, I don't think. I don't know what they claim it has, but it won't give you anywhere near the kind of R value that extended polystyrene or RMAX or any of those other isocyanurate, polyisocyanurate formulations that they sell in Home Depot. All of those will give you much, much better insulation for a lot less money than a hive hugger. On the sides, the real issue, remember, it's a 75-25 heat loss mixture. So you're going to lose 75% of your heat out of the top of the colony, 25 out of the side. So I think that these folks advertise these products like Hive Hugger and a few of the other ones, and they're not understanding the physics of the way heat loss works. So they're great to put around the colony. It's a nice windbreak, but make sure you add a lot of top insulation to that hive hugger. In cluster that's in thermoregulation, producing heat. It'll keep that clear of moisture. And the moisture that we've got a lot of evidence at this point where we have moved away from the bee lore about having to ventilate colonies to let the moisture and CO2 out of it. We've become sophisticated enough in our understanding of the whole thermodynamics to understand now that bees have they tried to tell us this by living in trees where there's almost an infinite amount of top insulation, but we haven't listened until recently. And now we understand the way that all of the convection flows occur in a colony and what leaving the liquid moisture that condenses on the cooler surfaces in the colony, what the purpose of that is for, the biological purpose that bees have evolved with over the years to live with. They want that moisture in the colony. It gives off latent heat when it forms. So when a warm vapor turns into a liquid droplet, it gives off latent heat. That's just a physics principle.
Can I put a few
and the bees recover that. And then it sits there as a drop of liquid water. Now, when they break cluster inside the colony and they move over to some capped honey, when they uncap that honey, they don't eat that like that. They've got to water it down. They need water, and that's what they use it for. Marta, why don't you explain what you did with that? And because it's available now, and as you might have known, I posted it on our resource page. So just give us a little overview of what you did there.
Thank you. Sure. So it's a spreadsheet which pretty much compares different varroa treatments with like a focusing on it. It doesn't go into details. Obviously, we have to follow the labels for detail of application, but it gives you the temperatures, it gives you the size, like how many frames of bees need to be present to apply the medication, the treatments. It gives you can the treatment be applied with supers on when the brood is present. So that gives you a certain characteristics, and I hope it makes it easier to select the treatments based on the status of the colony, the time, the temperatures, all those different conditions we have to consider.
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful document. She put a lot of work into it, and we're fortunate enough that she gave it to us to give to all of you. So now there's 680 beekeepers that have access to that resource. And as Marta is saying, it's a guide for you. If you have questions about how, if you're putting together a treatment strategy, and you should have one that incorporates more than one kind of chemical, and especially soft chemicals, like when am I going to use formic acid? When can I use a Varroxsan, which she just updated it to include Varroxsan, and all the other treatments that are available. When do you apply them? How can you apply them? What time? And as what we're not trying to supplement, we're not trying to usurp the authority of the label. As mentioned, it's a decision-making thing. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. We will see you. I won't see you at the bee yard, but we are going to have an event coming up in January for we call it the midwinter cluster. It was a great event last year. People brought food. We talked about all kinds of really interesting stuff. We didn't really do any formal talks, but people got together and we had a little raffle. It wasn't actually a raffle. It was something else. We couldn't call it a raffle, but we called it something else. And it went over really big. So you'll see that. We'll send you an email out for all of you, and you will see when we're going to do that. And that'll be our next actual physical gathering together. All right, cool. Look for our November speaker, which is soon. And then we finish the year with Tom Seeley. Don't miss either of these two. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to end the meeting, and I will see you soon all. Bye.